Sri Lankan papers gave full coverage to the case. Numerous attempts to secure pardon during the 7 years since she was sentenced to death failed.
And we also know that torture itself does not yield valuable information. Torture yielded the fact that, in fact, the Iraqis had weapons of mass destruction, which was not really very helpful information since it was faulty.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 22 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the internet at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. We begin with 2 short videos from Al Jazeera. The first about the beheading execution of a Sri Lankan domestic worker in Saudi Arabia. Her name was Rizana Nafeek. She had been convicted of murder, but according to Human Rights Watch, she had no legal help at all until after she was sentenced to death. Then to the latest underreported event in Iraq, where thousands of people are demonstrating daily against the government. After that interview in New Haven with people who are angry at the new film Zero Dark 30. Then part of a talk by Sahar Aziz at the Connecticut Coalition Against Indefinite Detention. We close with a bedtime story, a scary one, presented by the Chicago Teachers Union.
A mother's anguish. Rizana's mother broke down when talking on the phone to this social worker who had supported the family throughout the case. The girl was 17 years old and had never been out of her village. In this, her first letter home, she writes how difficult she was finding the job.
It was work all the time for her, and lack of training in running a home. Because she's 17 years old, she has not had the experience of bottle feeding children. And she went as a housemaid but was given the task of feeding this baby.
Sri Lankan papers gave full coverage to the case. Numerous attempts to secure pardon during the 7 years since she was sentenced to death failed. Even this last-minute appeal from her family, filmed 3 days ago, came too late. And it's this shack that Rizana's family calls home, a home she had hopes of rebuilding.
It's poverty that pushed her into this situation. I'm sad for her as a fellow citizen that she had to face this end.
Broken dreams, disappointment and even death. Common factors for thousands of Sri Lankans like Rizana searching for a better life. For those left behind, nothing but heartache. Minna Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
Enough is enough. The execution of Rizana Nafeek should be the last straw. In Saudi Arabia, there are 45 foreign maids on death row. The Saudi Arabian kingdom executes people for witchcraft and blasphemy, lashes women who have the nerve to drive cars, forbids any trade unions, but allows old men to marry children. Political rights are non-existent and demonstrations are violently put down. So Saudi Arabia is notorious as a refuge for tyrants like Idi Amin of Uganda and Zine Ben Ali of Tunisia. It made war on the Bahrain Democratic Movement, supports the worst sectarians in Syria, and has agreed to help Israel in any attack on Iran. Saudi Arabia should be an international pariah. I've started an internet petition calling for something that will make the Saudi royals sit up and take notice. The cancellation of the $60 billion arms deal they made with the United States. Take a look at our website, thestruggle.org, and see if you can sign on to this petition. Now to Iraq, where the U.S.-constructed government has so offended the Sunni minority that they're out in the streets daily in their thousands.
It's the third consecutive week of protests, and the numbers are increasing. Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets across Sunni provinces, including parts of Baghdad. But despite the heavy security presence and attempts by the army to prevent people from reaching mosques, many showed up for Friday prayers. At al-Qura Mosque, politicians and clerics called on protests to carry on.
I warn the army against being a tool to curb protesters. I call on you to carry on till your demands are met.
In Ramadi, the birthplace of the protests, tens of thousands continued their sit-in. They warned Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki of using force against them. And in Samarra and Mosul, thousands more demanded an end to what they describe as the marginalization of Sunnis. They also want the abolition of an anti-terrorism law which they say targets them, and the release of Sunni prisoners. The government's stance is that all demands should be dealt with according to the Iraqi constitution. It blames foreign countries of supporting the protesters to ignite a sectarian strife. But in Najaf, hundreds of Shia protesters gathered to support the Prime Minister and his policies. Banners denounced Sunni leaders, and the protesters rejected the Sunni demands.
In New Haven, people outraged at the torture scenes in Zero Dark 30 leafleted a local theater. Why did you come down today to leaflet the theater?
Well, I received information on it from another member of our congregation, the Unitarian Society of New Haven, and she told me about what was happening, that Reclaiming the Prophetic Voice had talked to her about it and emailed her. So when I got the email, I thought, I want to be down there, I want to be working against torture and bringing it to people's attention.
Now, have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't, and I maybe will be able to see it when it comes in the small screen and then walk in after all the torture scenes are done. But I think I'd have to watch it at home. I wouldn't watch it in a big theater.
I assume you read a bunch about it.
Yes, I have, and I've read quite a bit, and am very concerned with the kind of information that it presumes or presents as facts and gives an entirely false interpretation of what the chain of events was leading up to Osama bin Laden's capture and death.
And to what extent does torture play a role in this supposed capture and killing?
Really, the main theme is about torture, and the idea that the torture of individuals led to information being given up that led to the capture of Osama bin Laden through the identification of the courier. And that's really false, and we know it from, in fact, the records that speak to it. And we also know that torture itself does not yield valuable information. Torture yielded the fact that, in fact, the Iraqis had weapons of mass destruction, which was not really very helpful information since it was faulty. So the idea that torture really provides productive, helpful information, I think, is faulty. That's one thing. But most of all, it's really a violation of the Geneva Accords and a violation of United States law, and is something that's not worthy of us as a country.
So if the facts were different, and if torture had played a big role in getting Osama bin Laden, that wouldn't have changed your opinion?
No, it wouldn't have changed my mind. I really believe that we have to live by a governance, a moral and ethical governance that countries have really decided to accept and share in. And I do think that there are other ways that one gets that information, which we did with Osama bin Laden. So no, I really think it is not correct. I don't think it's ethically, morally, spiritually, religiously, governmentally good, whatever.
Last question. What has been the reaction of people when you hand out the leaflets? What do they say?
Well, interesting enough, there are very few people coming at this time of day. They must be staying home waiting for Downton Abbey or something. I don't know, or I guess the football games, maybe that. But I think they've been pretty accepting of it. I think when leaflets are taken in by people who appear to be friendly, us, I think people are curious as to what it really contains. And they seem to read it and be interested. I think it's not, it's an easy leaflet to read, and I think it really makes one question what one has seen in the movie or what one's going to see, and look for beyond a movie, what really is the truth. And that's what I hope would happen.
Wanted to talk about your sign. Could you describe it and explain what you meant by it?
I've had it for a while. I mean, it talks about the fact that making torture legal would turn the law into a criminal enterprise. And essentially, is from the beginning, the ways in which the administration of this country has treated torture is to give it a gloss of legal acceptability. But then any crime committed by governments has that same mask.
Sahar Aziz is an associate professor of law at Texas Wesleyan. She spoke at the conference of the Connecticut Coalition Against Indefinite Detention. Here is the beginning of her remarks.
So today I want to focus on three main issues. The first is that civil liberties under President Obama is as much in danger, if not more, than it was under President Bush. And I think for those who are becoming more complacent or who think, well, it's better than the other party, I'm afraid if you look at the record, at least with regard to civil liberties, that is unfortunately not the case. The second point is that one of the reasons that continues is because that the American public has been hoodwinked into forfeiting its civil liberties through fear-mongering, that the Muslims are coming for you. And so many Americans unwittingly forfeit their civil liberties, thinking that it won't be applied towards them, thinking that it's a necessary evil in order to protect them from those evil terrorist Muslims, who are then subjected to agent provocateurs, entrapment in sting operations, informant infiltration of mosques, and prosecution for material support to terrorism without having to prove against them that they actually had an intent to support terrorism. And so once the legal framework is created to infringe on Muslim communities' rights in the name of keeping all of you safe, because of course you are different from them, right? It's us versus them. Then they come after you, literally you. This is literally probably the group. Hello to all the JTTF members. Hello to the FBI, hello to the informants. We are here to convert you to be one of us. And ultimately this culminates into a set of policies and practices that are commonly found in police states, where you have mass surveillance of emails and telephone conversations, where you have criminal investigations without any predicate act of wrongdoing, and all of that becomes the norm instead of the exception. And it's effectuated by the thousands of informants that are now on the FBI's roster that spy on political dissenters, and through the proliferation of spy centers, which are known as fusion centers. And they're all across the country, including in the state. So for these reasons, along with many more, we have to be vigilant. We have to hold our local, state, and federal government accountable. Because we've learned over the past 10 years in the United States, and I think most stingingly and most glaringly in the Middle East over the past 2 years and until today, is that freedom is not free. That your rights aren't worth any more than the paper they're written on if you're not willing to fight to defend them. So let's talk a little bit about President Obama's abysmal record, and I clearly don't have enough time to go through the litany of horrors. but I will at least focus on some that I think are worth talking about today, and hopefully things that you're talking about at your workshops in more detail. The first is the state secrets privilege, which is essentially the legal tool used to keep all of us in the dark and to make it nearly impossible for us to hold the government accountable when they torture us, when they spy on us, when they do anything under the name of national security. And if the government can define national security broadly and define terrorism broadly, then it can invoke the State Secrets Privilege Act, which essentially is a doctrine that was rarely used until after 9/11. It became used at an unprecedented rate, both under Bush and even more so under Obama, where they walk into court and say, "Judge, please dismiss this case. We can't even talk about it. We can't even say, torture? What are you talking about, torture? We can't say anything. State secret. If we have to even comment on it in any way, we would be jeopardizing national security." So when you had a case of Mohammed v. Jefferson Data Plan, Inc., which I don't know if some of you have heard of this case, which is where 5 survivors of the CIA's rendition program, where they were brutally tortured by foreign countries, because we sent them to those countries knowing full well that they were going to be tortured, and possibly we even participated in the torture, our CIA agents and FBI agents. So when they went to go sue the company that contracted with the government to provide the airplanes and other services, the government walked in and said, "State secrets privilege, Judge, please, you have to dismiss this right away." It can't even get past the very first procedural posture of the case. And when this started in Bush's administration, and when Obama came in, everybody thought, okay, that's it. Now we're going to finally be able to hold the torturers accountable. Obama's going to do what he promised in his campaign, and he's going to increase transparency, and he's going to go forward with this case and allow these survivors of torture, thanks to our wrongdoing by our government agents, to have their day in court at the very least. But to the contrary, Obama's administration more aggressively, defended the state secrets privilege, took the same position, and in fact, fought to the end, and ultimately they did not get their day in court. And the same happened with Maher Arar, and I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but he was a Canadian citizen of Syrian descent who was traveling home to Canada from, or I don't know if he's Tunisian or Syrian, but he went to Tunisia to visit family in 2002, and while changing planes in New York City on our soil, our authorities handed him over to the Syrians, knowing very full well that he was going to get tortured, if not killed. And indeed, he was tortured. He was repeatedly beaten with electric cables. He was confined in a cell with the size of a grave for 10 months. When he was asked about the torture he persevered as a result of our government's illegal and immoral handover to the Syrian intelligence forces, he stated, "It was so painful that I forgot every enjoyable moment in my life." And what did our government have to say about that? State secrets privilege. Sorry. Courts cannot even examine the conduct. They can't even ask what our role was. In other words, you have absolutely no right to even walk into a courtroom. This is all a state secret. This is all national security. And of course, forget about an apology, much less a day in court. And so until now, Maher Arar has gotten absolutely nothing from the United States, notwithstanding that we were proactively part of his torture. And President Obama's administration is to blame for that as much as President Bush's administration. But as we advocate and we dissent, we'll inevitably be subjected to the state's surveillance and investigative authorities, which have exponentially grown since 9/11. So, in other words, here are these cases that are very offensive and something that we should be doing something about, and we're here to do something about those cases and many other cases. But we then become the target. So as you go to defend those who have been oppressed, you find yourself a part of the oppressed. And so if you're traveling abroad for any reason, if you're going to the Middle East, if you're going to South Asia, if you're going to Afghanistan to fight for democracy, not to be too facetious, you will find yourself coming home and having your laptop searched, and your books searched, and your iPhone, and your electronic devices without a warrant, without any suspicion that you've done any wrongdoing. And again, the courts offer you no relief because the government walks in and says national security, we have to do this to keep this country safe. And it started out where it was mainly Muslims who were being subjected to these border searches. And the public thought, well, you know, we gotta watch out for those Muslims. So it's, you know, it's wrong, we know it's wrong, but it's not me, and it's, you know, it's not a big deal. Sometimes somebody's gotta bear that burden. But, of course, what happens? It starts to be expanded. And so then it goes to business people, it goes to anyone who's traveling, it goes to academics. And so you have a case now of Pascal Abador, who is studying for his doctorate degree in Islamic studies, and he sued the government after he was handcuffed and detained at the border during an Amtrak trip from Montreal to New York. He was questioned and placed in a cell for several hours. His laptop was searched and kept for 11 days. And according to government data, these types of searches are not rare. Or they claim they're rare, but if you think 36,000 people per year are being screened by CBP without a warrant, this is all of your personal information, your texts, your Facebook, they get into everything. If you don't think that is a big deal, then perhaps you agree with the new norm of the United States of, what should we call it, the United States of no civil liberties.
Now to that scary bedtime story by a union that went out into the streets to defend jobs, pay, and student learning. The Chicago Teachers Union.
Daddy, will you read me a bedtime story?
Okay, sweetie, but just one. It's a school night. So, what kind of story do you want?
A scary story.
A scary one? Okay. I'll tell you the story of the Fat Cats.
Ooh.
Once upon a time, long, long ago, the educators of Chicago did something that would change our lives forever. There were a bunch of fat cats running the schools back then. And even though they were making tons of money, they wanted more. So, they forced the educators to work longer hours, take pay cuts, and move their students into unsafe buildings. These actions hurt the educators, but the fat cats promised it was best for the students. Soon, they started noticing that none of the money was going to the students, though. Instead, it was all going straight to the fat cats, making them even richer. The educators realized they had been lied to and that the fat cats didn't care about them or the students.
Bad kitty.
Right then, the educators decided they had had enough. All the teachers decided to join forces and form what was called a union. And by standing together, they were able to fight back against the greedy fat cats. And they ended up winning and getting what was right for their students and themselves. After that, years and years went by. And even though new fat cats tried different ways to take advantage of educators and students, the union was always there to step in and protect them. But last year, a new evil fat cat landed in Chicago, and he brought in a whole litter box full of evil fat cats from all over the country.
Uh-oh.
They sat in their fancy offices and came up with a plan to take advantage of the educators and students. This new idea was one they were sure would work. They were going to get rid of the union once and for all. The fat cats went out and started telling everyone how bad the educators were, how lazy they had become, and how the students didn't even like them. And unfortunately, people started to believe the fat cats. They got parents and community members to agree that educators and their union were bad, and that the schools their kids go to should be turned around. And just like that, their plan worked. Educators and the community started fighting each other, and the fat cats just sat back and laughed and watched as the money rolled right into their pockets, just like the good old days. But there was one thing the fat cats didn't plan for, and that was the educators coming together in a way no one had ever seen before. At the Auditorium Theater in downtown Chicago, history was made. Almost 10,000 teachers, paraprofessionals, students, and supporters all came together to stand up to the Fatcats once again. They rallied in the theater, rallied in the streets, rallied in front of City Hall. And after that, for the first time in decades, the educators of Chicago announced they were going on strike until every student, educator, and parent was treated with respect. And to the Fatcats' surprise, communities started to rally around the educators, giving them their support. And the Fatcats could do nothing but watch as their sneaky plans began to crumble right before their eyes yet again. The educators of Chicago are hoping that people see what the Fatcats are really doing. They're closing our public schools, destroying the livelihoods of our educators, and jeopardizing the future of our children. All so they can give more money to their millionaire buddies and charter cronies. The stakes have never been higher in Chicago, but that's okay, because as a city, that's when we're at our best. Don't let the Fatcats bully students or educators anymore. Join the movement to fight for education equality. Keep public schools open, protect our educators, and give every student the education they deserve. And just like that day, long, long ago, we'll defeat the greedy Fatcats and change our lives forever. The end.
Daddy, are the Fatcats gonna get my school?
Not if we stand up against them.
The Fatcats are mean. I don't want them to ever win.
Oh, me neither, sweetie. Now get some sleep. Your school will be okay. I hope.
When the world has gone crazy and it's all becoming clear, when they're gunning down our comrades and it seems the end is near, as they're loading up the launchers for the tear gas grenades, we can take off our bandanas and kiss behind the barricades. When it's madness all around and you can see this at a glance, we will sing and we will cry.